Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I always thought freedom would taste sweeter. For years it was all I wanted, to step out from under my family's roof, to stop being the one everyone whispered about, the dropout, the disappointment, the one who never measured up. Independence was supposed to be my redemption, the proof that I could build something for myself, even if it wasn't much. So when I finally signed the lease on that apartment, a one-bedroom tucked into a fading building on the edge of the city, it felt like I'd won. It wasn't glamorous. The rent was cheap, the brick outside was gray and streaked with rust from old balconies, and the lobby smelled like mildew barely masked by harsh cleaner. But it was mine. My first real place. I moved in on a sunlit afternoon, dragging 2 duffel bags behind me while the rest of my things, a hand-me-down couch, a mattress, a table with one wobbly leg, had been delivered earlier that day. The cab driver had grunted when he dropped me off, muttering something about the neighborhood not being what it used to be. I ignored him. I'd heard warnings all my life and was tired of them. When the elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, though I felt the first twist in my stomach, a man was standing in the hallway, only a few feet from my door. He looked late 40s, maybe older. His skin had that sickly pallor of someone who'd been sick a long time or hadn't seen the sun in months. His eyes were hollow, sunken deep into his face, and his hoodie, zipped to the throat, hung loose on his frame. What unsettled me most wasn't his appearance, though. It was the way he stood, perfectly still, like a statue. When he noticed me, his gaze locked on mine with unnerving sharpness. "New tenant?" His voice was gravel dragged across concrete. I swallowed, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just moved in." He didn't return the smile. He just stared. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched until he finally gave a slow nod. "I'm in 304. His thumb jerked toward the apartment beside mine. I muttered something about unpacking and fumbled my key into the lock. My hand shook more than I wanted to admit. When I closed the door behind me, I leaned against it, heart thudding. My rational brain told me it was nothing. Weird neighbors existed everywhere, but deep down, every hair on my arms was standing. I busied myself with unpacking, trying to ignore it. The city noise outside was oddly comforting. Honking horns, distant music, laughter from strangers. Normal life. By midnight, I was collapsed on the couch with a frozen pizza and my laptop. For the first time, I let myself breathe. This was my place. My start. Then I heard it. A faint sound seeping through the wall from 304. At first, I thought it was pipes or wind pushing against the old windows. But the longer I listened, the more certain I became. A soft, broken whimper, it sounded human. I sat up, pulse quickening. Maybe it was a TV show, but it didn't carry the rhythm of dialogue. It was jagged, hurt. Then came a muffled thump that rattled the wall. My breath caught. "It's nothing," I whispered to myself. "Just a dropped pot. Maybe a pet." But the sound didn't stop. I barely slept that night. Over the next few days, I ran into him again and again. Each time left me more unsettled. The first was when I left for work. He was standing at his doorway, watching me. His eyes followed me like searchlights. "Hey," I offered, pretending casual. He waited too long before answering. "You work late?" I hesitated. "Yeah, night shifts." Another pause. His voice lowered. "Not many people come and go at night. Good time to be alone." I forced a nod and hurried down the hall. Even hours later at work, I couldn't shake the weight of his words. The second time was in the stairwell. He was carrying a trash bag, but it didn't hang right. Lumpy. Uneven. I must have stared, because he yanked it tighter against his side. "Getting rid of some stuff," he muttered, brushing past me. The smell hit me like a punch. Sour, sweet, rotting. My stomach turned. That night, the noises escalated. Not just whimpers, screams, muffled but unmistakable. My chest clenched so hard I could barely breathe. I sat frozen on my bed, torn between dialing the police and convincing myself I was imagining it. "It's not my business," I whispered. "I can't get involved." That was the lie I clung to. A week passed. The building grew heavier with each day, the hallways dimmer, the air thicker. When I came home late one evening, the hallway light was flickering, casting long, jerking shadows on the walls. As I passed 304, a stench poured out from the cracks in the door. Thick, putrid, decay. I nearly gagged. I forced myself inside my apartment, slamming the door shut. I tried to breathe through my shirt, but the smell clung to me, settled into my hair, my skin. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Right outside my door, I know you hear it. I froze. My chest locked. The voice was low, unmistakable. Him. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then stupidly, I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Fingernails dragging down my door. I stumbled back, pulse hammering, my skin cold and damp. The scratching stopped as suddenly as it began. I barely slept, jerking awake at every imagined sound. By morning, something had shifted inside me. Fear and curiosity tangled in a knot I couldn't untie. I had to know. I couldn't stand another night of waiting, listening. I went to 304, I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. My hand hovered over the doorknob. My chest screamed not to, but my fingers turned anyway. It wasn't locked. The door creaked open and the stench hit me like a wave. Rot thick and suffocating. The air clung to my skin, my throat. And then I saw the floor. Dark smears dragged across the wood. Handprints staining the walls, phones, wallets, shoes. A pile of belongings abandoned in the corner. The couch was ripped to shreds. Its insides spilling out like organs. I didn't have time to breathe before the bathroom door creaked open. A shadow shifted inside. I turned to run, and that was when the hand grabbed me. You shouldn't be here. His voice was close now, right in my ear. I thrashed, yanking back, but his hand only tightened. My other hand clawed blindly at the wall until my nails scraped against something wet, sticky. I pulled back instinctively, heart ricocheting against my ribs. Let me go. My voice cracked, breaking in the middle. He didn't answer. The smell was overwhelming. Rot, sweat, something metallic. My knees buckled. He yanked me backward, dragging me across the floor toward the bathroom. I caught a glimpse as the door opened wider, a pale bulb buzzing overhead, casting shadows across tools lined up on a bench. Blades, pliers, a hammer darkened with rust, or blood. My mind refused to decide. I twisted hard, kicking out. My foot connected with his leg. He grunted but didn't release me. My chest filled with pure raw terror. This was it. I'd die here, nameless in an apartment no one cared about. Then everything went black. When I woke, the floor was cold against my cheek. My wrists burned. Something rough bound my hands behind me. The air was heavier here, thicker, as if the walls themselves exhaled rot. I kept my eyes shut, forcing my breath to slow. Shuffle. A deliberate step. He was in the room. I risked opening my eyes. The light overhead flickered, buzzing. He stood at the workbench, back turned, humming a low, off-key tune. His shoulders rose and fell with unnatural rhythm, like the hum was keeping him alive. On the table, the tools glistened faintly. The hammer, a saw, a knife whose edge caught the light. My stomach heaved. I turned my face into the floor to muffle the sound. He slammed something down on the table. I flinched, a phone, not mine. Another shuffle, and then he turned. His eyes caught the dim light gleaming too brightly. His lips peeled back into a smile so slow it felt rehearsed. You shouldn't have come in. I tried to keep my voice calm, steady, even as my pulse screamed in my ears. You don't have to do this, he blinked. Then the smile stretched wider. I know. And then he lunged. I rolled, body moving before thought. My wrists tore against the rope, skin burning. My foot lashed out, connecting with something solid. He stumbled, curse ripping from his throat. My fingers scraped across the floor, desperate for anything. Cold glass kissed my skin, a shard. I clutched it, dragging it against the rope until the fibers snapped. He was on me again, raising the hammer. I slashed upward, the shard biting into his shoulder. He howled, jerking back. I didn't wait. I ran through the doorway, down the hall, the smell chasing me like a shadow. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I kept moving. His footsteps thundered behind me, uneven but relentless. The stairwell loomed. I flung myself down 2 steps at a time, nearly tripping, catching the railing just in time. My vision swam. The pounding behind me grew closer, then voices. Faint, distant. The landlord, tenants, someone, help! My scream shredded my throat. He tried to kill me. Apartment 304. Call the police! I burst into the lobby, wild-eyed, gasping for air. The landlord froze, keys jangling in his hand. his face drained of color. 304? I nodded, frantic, pointing behind me. But when I turned, nothing. The stairwell was empty. No footsteps. No shadows. By the time police arrived, the apartment was a tomb. Blood smears, handprints, a pile of belongings. Wallets, phones, shoes. But no man. No neighbor. They searched the building, the surrounding streets, the city, nothing. I moved out the next day. For weeks I couldn't sleep. Every creak of my new apartment made me jolt awake, convinced he'd found me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing in the hallway, smile stretched too wide, eyes gleaming. I told myself it was over, that I was safe, that he wasn't real. But deep down I wasn't sure. And then last night, as I was locking my new door, my phone buzzed. No name, no number, 2 words. Good time to be alone. My hands shook so violently I dropped the phone. It clattered against the floor, the glow of the screen spilling across the dark hallway. And for a moment, just for a breath, I thought I saw a shadow move across it. I haven't picked it up. I don't know if I ever will. I never thought my first house would feel like a mistake. That's the truth of it, and maybe the part I keep circling back to when sleep refuses to come. Everyone tells you that buying a home is supposed to be exciting, the kind of milestone that proves you've arrived, that you're independent, that you're building a life. But from the moment I set foot inside mine, I felt something off, like I had stepped into a room where someone else had just left. The air still charged with their presence. It wasn't much to look at. An older 2-bedroom place on the outskirts of town, siding peeling like sunburnt skin. A front yard just big enough for patchy grass and a lone dying tree. The backyard had a patio that looked like one strong wind could tear it apart. But I had scraped and saved for years. Lived in cramped apartments where neighbors stomped overhead and thin walls made me feel like a guest in my own life. Now it was mine. At 26, the word mortgage terrified me. But the idea of privacy felt worth the price. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly retirees and older couples. Peaceful, I thought, the kind of quiet that lets you breathe. My parents and my best friend Emily helped me move in. We laughed through the aches of hauling furniture, cursed the heat, and collapsed in the living room with takeout cartons. I should have felt nothing but joy that day. But I noticed him, my next-door neighbor. He was standing on his porch watching us. An older man, maybe late 50s or 60s, lean frame, gray hair cut close to his head. His face wasn't remarkable, the kind of lined and weathered look that could belong to anyone's uncle. But there was something in his stillness. The way he stood there, not fidgeting, not calling out right away, just studying us. When he finally spoke, his voice carried easily, deep and rough like gravel dragged across cement. Need a hand with that? My dad, arms wrapped around a heavy box, grunted without looking over. We got it, thanks. The man didn't leave. He nodded slowly, lips twitching into something like a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. After a moment, he added, "Name's Roger. Welcome to the neighborhood." I smiled back, automatic and polite. Thanks, but inside something squirmed. There was a weight in the way he looked at me, like he could peel back the mask of niceties and see the unease beneath. I told myself I was being unfair. Maybe he was just a lonely man curious about the new neighbor. But as the sun sank and the boxes dwindled, I glanced over again. He was sitting in a rocking chair on his porch, still watching. His eyes fixed on me with a patience that felt unnatural, as if he had all the time in the world. By the time my parents and Emily left, night had settled. I curled on the couch with a blanket, the smell of paint still sharp in the air, a movie murmuring from the TV. I must have drifted in and out, eyelids heavy, when a sound pulled me upright. A knock at the door. The clock on the wall glowed 11:48 p.m. My breath caught. Nobody visits at that hour. Not on the first night, not in this neighborhood. The air seemed to thicken, cold crawling under my skin. I crept to the blinds and tilted them just enough to see Roger, standing on my doorstep facing the door as if he'd been waiting for me. A shiver shot through me. I hadn't turned on many lights. Only the blue glow of the TV lit the room. How did he know I was awake? How could he see me? And then he lifted his hand, waved. I should have ignored it, I know that now. Pretended not to be home. But he'd seen me. I could feel it in the way his eyes tracked the sliver in the blinds. My feet moved against my will, dragging me to the door. I cracked it open, the chain still fastened. My voice came out tighter than I wanted. "Hey," Roger's smile was slow, deliberate. "Saw you were still up. Thought I'd invite you over for dinner tomorrow. Welcome to the neighborhood." Something in the phrasing made my stomach knot. "Saw you were still up." "Oh, I've actually got plans tomorrow." His smile faltered, just a flicker, before he steadied it again. "Another time then?" "Yeah, maybe." But he didn't move. His eyes drifted past me, into the dim interior of my house as though the door was an inconvenience between him and what he really wanted. My pulse hammered, each second stretching too long. Finally he nodded and turned, but not before letting his gaze linger on me one beat longer than comfort allowed. I shut the door fast, slid the deadbolt, then stood there listening to the silence. His footsteps receded across the porch. My throat was dry, skin prickling. The rest of that night I closed every curtain, checked every lock, and still couldn't sleep. The memory of his eyes hovered behind my lids, calm, watchful, and somehow expectant. The next day I clung to normalcy. Work, dinner with Emily, light spilling across restaurant tables where laughter felt easy. I told her about Roger, brushed it off with humor. She frowned. "Creepy old guy watching you on night one? That's not nothing." "I'm probably overreacting," I said. "He's just neighborly in a weird way." But her skepticism left a mark. When I returned home around 7, the house greeted me with its familiar smell of fresh paint and lingering cardboard. I slipped off my shoes, set my keys on the counter, and let the stillness settle. The kind of quiet I thought I'd wanted. And then I heard it. A sound from the hallway. Not the groan of settling wood, not pipes knocking. A deliberate sound, footsteps soft inside, my breath seized. Every sense sharpened. The house was supposed to be empty. I was alone, the footsteps moved toward me, I didn't wait. Barefoot I bolted through the front door, the cold pavement slicing my soles. My car sat in the driveway like salvation. Keys fumbled in trembling hands, the lock finally clicking as I hurled myself inside. When I dared to look back, my chest nearly collapsed. The front door of my house stood wide open, and in the doorway, framed by the light, was Roger. He scanned the street, gaze sliding past my car, and then with unnerving calm he turned and stepped back inside my home. I don't remember turning the key in the ignition. I remember the scream of my tires, the sickening shake of my hands as I grabbed my phone. "Webben, what's your emergency?" My neighbor, he broke into my house. My voice cracked. "He's inside right now, I saw him." The dispatcher's calm words barely registered over the blood thudding in my ears. Minutes stretched like hours until flashing red and blue painted the street. From the safety of my locked car, I watched officers approach Roger's door. He answered as though disturbed from a nap. Casual, calm. They went inside. One officer came to me after, his face unreadable. He admitted he was inside. Said he was just checking in, making sure you were safe. Safe. The words soured in my stomach. "Do you know if anything's missing?" I shook my head helplessly. I hadn't even unpacked all the boxes. How could I know? The officer hesitated, then revealed what he'd found. A key. "My house key," I whispered. I never gave him a key. They speculated about spares hidden by previous owners, but the thought that Roger had one, had been inside, curdled something deep inside me. He was arrested but released. A neighborly misunderstanding, they called it. That night I fled to Emily's, clutching a hastily packed bag, my heart still vibrating with adrenaline. The next day I changed every lock, but locks only work if you believe they mean safety. For a week Roger's porch sat empty, no sightings, no knocks, but I felt him in the shadows like the pressure of unseen eyes on the back of my neck. Then one night I came home late. The streets were hushed, darker than usual, the air too still. I walked to my door, keys ready, and froze. The handle, scratched, gouged, as though clawed by something desperate to get inside. I stumbled back, my breath shallow. Across the street, under the faint glow of a lamppost, a shape lingered. Roger, still, watching. My body acted before thought. I ran to my car, slammed the door, and drove straight to the police station, the image of those scratches burned into my mind. This time, they listened. They found his record, burglary, stalking, allegations that never stuck. They issued a restraining order. A month later, his house went up for sale. Someone else moved in. I tried to exhale. but sometimes late at night I wake with the sensation of being observed. The shadows shift in my periphery, and I wonder, how many nights had he already been inside before I noticed? I thought the worst was over when his house sold. That's what I told myself as I watched the moving truck rumble away, taillights shrinking down the street. The new owners waved when they spotted me watching from my porch, and I waved back, trying to mimic warmth. But inside, my chest was a nest of hornets. Roger was gone, but his absence didn't settle me. It left a vacuum, the kind you fill with questions you don't want answered. For weeks, I tried to live normally. I unpacked boxes, decorated walls, learned the rhythm of the neighborhood. Emily came over with wine, with her easy laugh, with reassurances I clung to. See, he's out of your life. You're fine now. But I wasn't fine because the house remembered him. At night, I would lie in bed, blinds drawn tight, and hear things. A creak in the hallway like a cautious step, a breath of air against my ear when the windows were shut. Once I woke to the faint scent of cigar smoke curling in the room, thick, acrid, clinging to the sheets. My dad smoked cigars when I was a kid. I know that smell too well. Roger had always smelled faintly of it. I convinced myself it was in my head. Residual fear, that's all. But then small things shifted. A mug on the counter I didn't remember setting there. A drawer left open I was certain I had closed. My phone charger moved from the nightstand to the dresser. Emily would say, "You're exhausted." Trauma sticks. It makes you second-guess yourself. She wasn't wrong. But sometimes, when the house was dark and the air so still I could hear my pulse in my ears, I swore I could feel him. Like the walls had absorbed his presence and now exhaled it in whispers. One night I woke to a sound that hollowed me out, the doorknob turning. I sat up in bed, heart exploding. The front doorknob rattled, jiggled, then stilled. I held my breath until my lungs ached. After long minutes, silence stretched again. I didn't sleep after that. The police told me the restraining order was still valid, but without proof, their hands were tied. I started to hate that phrase, without proof. Proof didn't matter when your bones knew the truth. I bought cameras, little blinking eyes in the corners of rooms. For a week, nothing. No movement, no sound but mine. I almost started to believe I'd conjured him into existence. But then a recording. The living room camera caught motion at 2:37 a.m. Just a flicker, a shadow crossing the wall. The footage was grainy, indistinct, but the shape. It was tall, thin, human. My stomach turned. When I showed Emily, she frowned hard, replaying it again and again. This could be anything. A car passing. A glitch. "It's him," I whispered. Her eyes softened, pitying. That hurt worse than skepticism, because if no one else saw him, then maybe I was truly alone with it. The house began to feel hostile. Every sound sharpened into threat. Pipes moaned like someone sighing in another room. Shadows bent strangely in corners. My reflection in the darkened window sometimes looked delayed, a fraction of a second slower to match me. I started sleeping with lights on, or rather trying to sleep. By the third week, exhaustion eroded me raw. My hands shook. My chest buzzed with constant dread. That was when the scratching started, soft, irregular, at the back door. Some nights it was delicate, like nails teasing wood. Other times frantic, gouging as though something or someone was desperate to claw inside. I would creep to the kitchen, knife clutched, my breath fogging in the cold air, and stand frozen as the scratching stopped just when I drew close. When I opened the door, nothing. No tracks in the dirt, no broken lock. I started whispering to myself just to hear another voice. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. Still up? My blood iced. I hadn't given my new number to anyone but family and Emily. My hands trembled as I typed back, "Who is this?" No reply. The next morning I found a note tucked under my doormat. "You shouldn't ignore dinner invitations." I tore it to shreds, my breath ragged, tears blurring the world. The police came again. They checked the new neighbors, canvassed the street. They told me no cameras caught anyone near my house. My own devices showed nothing, but the note was real. I hadn't hallucinated paper between my fingers. Emily urged me to move out. "Sell it, start over. This place is poison for you." But the thought of leaving, of admitting he had driven me out, twisted my gut. This was supposed to be mine, my safe place. If I left, he won. I couldn't let him win, and yet, every night he was here. Whether in flesh or in memory, Roger lived inside these walls. I began to talk to him. Quiet, trembling whispers in the dark. "What do you want from me?" Silence answered, sometimes broken by faint laughter, or maybe the hum of the refrigerator warping into something else. The line between Roger and the house blurred. Maybe he never left. Maybe he didn't need to. The climax came on a storm-soaked night. Thunder cracked the sky open, rain lashing windows. The power flickered, then failed, plunging me into a darkness so complete it pressed against my eyes. That was when I heard it. Footsteps. Not cautious this time. Bold. Crossing the hallway, heavy enough to rattle picture frames. I gripped the knife I kept under my pillow and staggered into the living room, flashlight beam shaking in my hand, and froze. The front door stood open. Wind and rain slashed through the gap. In the doorway stood Roger, dripping, grinning, eyes gleaming with something feral. "Told you I'd check on you." My scream tore my throat raw. The beam of my flashlight caught his face, twisted with glee, and in that moment the air grew wrong. The shadows bent toward him, stretching unnaturally. The smell of smoke and rot filled the room, suffocating. I don't remember lunging. I don't remember the knife connecting. Only the warmth splattering my arm, the sound of him choking, staggering back into the storm. Lightning split the sky, blinding. And when it faded, the doorway was empty. No body, no blood. Only rain soaking the floorboards. I searched until dawn, drenched and shaking. No trace of him. The police found nothing. Again, Emily cried when she saw me. "You need help," she whispered. "This isn't safe anymore." Maybe she's right. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the storm itself birthed him out of my terror. But at night, when I lie awake, I hear him still. Footsteps pacing the hall. Breathing just outside the door. Sometimes I wake to find the front door wide open, and once, only once, I swore I saw him in the rocking chair on my porch, where he'd first sat, watching me. Only now, when I blinked, the chair rocked on its own, slow, steady, as though he'd never left. So I ask myself every night, the question that gnaws through my mind like teeth through bone. Did Roger ever really move out? Or did he find a way to stay, inside the walls inside me, long after his house sold? I don't know which possibility scares me more. I moved into the apartment alone, thinking it'd be a fresh start. The building was old but cheap, and that was all I could afford. After 5 years in a small town where nothing ever changed, I needed more. More people, more action, more life. Moving to the city felt like a must. New job prospects, new opportunities. But from the very first night, I knew something wasn't right with this place. The apartment itself was fine. Small but manageable. Beige walls, thin carpeting, and one window that just looked out onto a brick wall. Nothing fancy. The previous tenant had left behind a few odd things. A broken chair, a half-empty bottle of dish soap under the sink, and a cheap plastic clock still ticking away on the wall. I didn't mind. It felt like a clean slate. That first night, though, was when it started. I was sitting on the floor, eating takeout from a greasy carton, trying to make the place feel like home. Then I heard it knocking. It didn't come from the door. It was inside the walls. At first, I thought it was the pipes, old plumbing settling in the heat. But as I sat there, the knocking came again. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, deliberate. I froze. The walls were thin. I could hear my neighbor's TV through them, but this wasn't that. The sound was coming from right behind the couch, from the wall itself. My heart started to race. I tried to talk myself down. It was nothing. Just the building settling. Just my nerves. I wasn't used to city life. By the time I crawled into bed, I'd convinced myself it was all in my head. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of knocking on my front door. I glanced at the clock, 1:47 a.m. My stomach twisted. Who the hell knocks on a stranger's door at this hour? I got out of bed and padded barefoot to the door. The carpet was soft under my feet, but my pulse hammered in my throat. I pressed my eye to the peephole, expecting to see a drunk neighbor or someone lost looking for an apartment number. But the hallway was empty. I stood there, breathing hard, my heart thudding in my ears. After a few seconds, I unlocked the door and cracked it open. Nothing. I stepped out into the hallway, eyes darting left, right. Silent. The other doors were closed. the dim overhead light flickering faintly. Just as I turned to go back inside, something caught my eye. A piece of paper. It was lying right outside my door. I bent down and picked it up. It was a torn-out magazine cover. The man on it had his eyes scratched out with thick black ink, and a jagged red X crossed over his face. I stared at it for a long moment. What the hell? A prank, I thought. Someone messing with me. I looked down the hall again, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but it was empty. I took the page back inside and tossed it in the trash. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I watched the other tenants carefully. The guy next door, 4B, seemed about my age, maybe late 20s. He had curly hair, wore glasses, and always looked like he'd just rolled out of bed. I'd seen him a few times, but we'd never really spoken. That afternoon, as I was locking my door to head out, I saw him step out of his apartment. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. He looked up, startled. His fingers tightened around the doorknob. "Hey," he muttered. I hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Did you hear knocking last night?" "Someone knocked on my door around 2 a.m. His expression didn't change. "Nope," he said flatly. I studied him for a second, trying to read his face. His eyes flicked to the side just for a split second. The smallest twitch, but enough to make my skin crawl. Something wasn't right. But before I could press further, he pulled the door shut behind him, disappearing into his apartment. I stood there, frozen for a moment, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I walked down the hallway, the air thick with tension. I glanced back at my neighbor's door, then back to him. He seemed uncomfortable, almost anxious. I didn't push it. Instead, I just nodded and left. But as I turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of him slipping back into his apartment, slamming the door shut behind him. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. More knocking. More strange papers. Pages from books with entire sections blacked out. Old photographs of people with their faces scratched out, as if someone wanted to erase them from existence. One day, I found a small cardboard box sitting outside my door. I opened it to find a dead cockroach inside. I couldn't understand what was happening, but it felt like some sick joke. The worst part? The knocking. It always came from the wall shared with 4B. Night after night, that same rhythmic tapping. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. Every night without fail. One evening, after a particularly loud round of knocking, I lost my patience. I marched straight to my neighbor's door and hammered on it. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. "I know you're in there," nothing. Not even the sound of movement behind the door. I stood there for a moment, fists clenched, a chill crawling up my spine. If he wanted to play games, fine. I walked back to my apartment, locked the door behind me, and tried to forget about him. At exactly 2 a.m., I heard the knocks again. This time they came from my bedroom wall, the same wall that connected to 4B, right where my bed was. The next day, I decided to ask around. There was a woman who lived across the hall from me, in her late 30s, always wearing a bathrobe and slippers. I caught her in the hallway and hesitated for a moment before speaking up. "Sorry to bother you," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Do you know the guy in 4B? Her face changed instantly. She glanced over at his door, then back at me. "You mean Mike?" she asked, her voice quiet. I nodded. She hesitated. "He moved out last month. Some kind of emergency." She gave me an odd look. "The apartment's been empty since." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "What? No. That's not right. I saw him just yesterday." Her expression hardened. "That's not possible. The place has been vacant for weeks." I felt a rush of cold wash over me. My mind started to spin. "Thanks," I mumbled, not able to think straight as I turned and walked back to my apartment, my hands shaking as I locked the door behind me. That night I couldn't sleep. The silence was unbearable. A week before I finally moved out, the knocking stopped entirely. It was eerie. How quiet the apartment felt after all that noise. On my last night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom closet door creaking open. My heart raced. I flicked on the light, but there was nothing inside except my clothes. But when I stepped closer, something caught my eye. Deep scratches. Long, jagged marks carved into the wood. They hadn't been there before. And in the middle of those scratches, someone had written my name. I left the next morning. When I called the landlord to ask about 4B, he confirmed that nobody had been renting it for over a month. The previous tenant, Mike, had moved out suddenly with no forwarding address. I don't know if it was a person, a spirit, or something else entirely. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear it. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I moved into this neighborhood about 2 years ago. It wasn't anything fancy, just a quiet middle-class suburb where the lawns were always trimmed, kids rode their bikes in the evenings, and neighbors gave each other polite nods as they passed. The kind of place where you felt safe, or at least that's what I thought. I'd bought the house after my divorce, hoping for a fresh start. It was modest, a 3-bedroom with a small backyard and a detached garage. Nothing extravagant, but it was mine. The house next door had been empty for a while. A for sale sign had sat out front for months, weathered and forgotten, and I'd gotten used to it. It was just another one of those things you don't really think about, until one day the sign was gone. The house was sold. I didn't think much about the new neighbor at first. I only saw him a few times, just glimpses. He was a middle-aged man, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s. Tall, but with a slouch, his brown hair thinning in patches, and his face always tight, like he was carrying a weight that never shifted. He never smiled, never waved, just moved around his yard like a shadow, avoiding eye contact whenever he could. I tried to be friendly once, just a simple, "Hey, welcome to the neighborhood." When I saw him at his mailbox, he barely turned his head, just enough to acknowledge me before he walked right back into his house, no word, no smile. Fine. Some people are just private, right? Everyone's got their baggage. Mine had been a whole damn suitcase. I figured he was probably just dealing with his own stuff. But then I started noticing things. Little things that made me uneasy. At night, I'd sometimes glance out my kitchen window and there he'd be, standing in his front yard, staring off into the distance. Not doing anything, just standing there like he was waiting for something or maybe someone. Other times I'd see him step outside, look around as if he were checking for something, then hurry back inside like he'd been spooked. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he had insomnia, or maybe he just liked the peace and quiet. Hell, maybe he was just a night owl. But that night, everything changed. It was around 3 a.m. I woke up with my throat dry, not realizing I was thirsty until my body forced me awake. Half asleep, I dragged myself out of bed and stumbled to the kitchen. As I poured a glass of water, I glanced out the window above the sink, the one that faced his house. That's when I saw him. He was standing between our houses in the narrow gap that barely caught any light. The faint glow from his porch light was enough to show me his figure, pacing back and forth. Something about the way he moved sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't walking like someone trying to get some fresh air, like a late-night thinker. No, he looked agitated, his head tilting like he was listening for something. Then, without warning, he stopped. I froze. His head snapped toward my kitchen window, and for a second, just a second, our eyes met. My heart slammed in my chest, and in that moment I saw it. His face shifted, surprise, then something else. I couldn't tell if it was anger or fear, but it was there, like a flicker in his eyes. The instant he realized I was watching him, he jerked his head away and bolted back into his house, almost running. I stood there, my breath stuck in my throat, not even realizing I'd been holding it. The whole thing lasted no more than 5 seconds, but it was enough. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I stared at his darkened house for a while, my mind racing, but I couldn't make sense of it. Shaking my head, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe he had trouble sleeping. Maybe I was just imagining things. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. To clear my mind, I finished my water and went back to bed. By morning, I'd almost forgotten about it, almost. But the next night, it happened again. I woke up at almost the exact same time, 3:04 a.m. This time, I wasn't thirsty. I just woke up like something had nudged me out of sleep. I sighed, rolled over, and pulled my blanket up. Then tap, I frowned. It was soft at first, barely noticeable, like the tip of a fingernail gently tapping against glass. I held my breath, listening. Tap, tap. It was coming from my bedroom window. A creeping chill spread through my chest, my body tensing, my mind scrambling for a rational explanation. A tree branch? No, there weren't any trees near that side of the house. A bird not at this hour, tap, tap, tap. This time it was deliberate, controlled. Someone was outside. I swallowed hard, my pulse thumping in my ears. My hand reached for the lamp on my nightstand, hesitating for just a second before flicking it on. The second the light filled the room, there was a sharp movement outside. A dark silhouette jerked backward, disappearing from the window. My breath caught in my throat. I threw the covers back, scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering. Rushing to the window, I yanked open the blinds. Nothing. The yard was empty. The neighbor's house was dark. I stayed there, staring out into the night, half expecting to see a figure slinking away into the shadows, but there was nothing. After a few minutes, I forced myself to breathe, my logical side scrambling for a reason. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe I'd imagined it. I locked all the doors, checked the windows, and eventually, after what felt like an eternity, went back to bed. But sleep didn't come easy. By morning, I was determined to find some kind of evidence. I went outside, walking the perimeter of my house. Nothing. No footprints. No disturbances in the dirt. No sign that anyone had been lurking outside my window at 3 a.m. But from that day on, I never saw my neighbor again. Days passed. Then weeks. His blinds stayed shut, his car never moved, and there were no signs of life coming from his house. It was as if he had vanished. At first I thought maybe he was just keeping to himself, but as time went on, the whole thing started to feel wrong. I asked a couple of neighbors if they'd seen him. Not for a while, one of them said. I figured he was out of town or something, but he wasn't. 2 months later, a for sale sign appeared in his yard. The house was empty. Nobody saw him leave. No moving trucks came. He was just gone. To this day, I don't know what he was doing outside my window that night. And honestly, I don't think I want to know. A few months after he disappeared, I was taking out the trash one evening when I noticed something strange. A small, folded piece of paper wedged into the crack of my front door. Frowning, I plucked it out and unfolded it. 3 words were scrawled in shaky handwriting. I saw you. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. I spun around, scanning the street. The neighborhood was quiet. No one was outside. The house next door was still vacant. I stood there for a long time, gripping the note, my heart pounding. Had he left this? Was he watching me even now? Or worse, had he never really left at all? I should have trusted my gut the moment I stepped off the bus. Something felt off. I've been babysitting for years, taking whatever gigs I could find, but this one, it didn't sit right. Maybe it was the frantic tone of the mother on the phone, desperate, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. Or maybe it was the house sitting all by itself at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by overgrown weeds like it hadn't seen a visitor in ages. But the real kicker? It was the man waiting by the curb. He didn't look like a father, not even close. Tall, mid-40s, light brown hair slicked back too perfectly, and a face that was scrubbed clean like he was auditioning for a role in some corporate ad. He wore a navy suit sharp as a tack, but his posture, stiff, too calculated. The kind of guy who practices his smile in the mirror. I could feel it in my bones, the way his presence made the air feel too heavy. Must be Ava, he said, his voice all smooth and warm, like he was reading from a script. I'm Daniel. I shook his hand out of reflex, trying to hide the unease creeping up my spine. His grip was firm, but it lingered too long. I forced out a polite smile. Nice to meet you. Behind him, I caught sight of the kids. One was a dark-haired boy, maybe 4 or 5, gripping the porch railing like he was afraid of falling off. The other, a pale little girl, was squatting down in the dirt, drawing with a stick. The boy looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. The girl didn't move. Didn't even blink. They're good kids, Daniel said, following my gaze. A little shy at first, but they'll warm up to you. I nodded, still scanning the house. Something about it didn't add up. It was clean. Too clean. Like no one really lived there. There weren't any toys scattered around. No family photos. No signs of life. Just emptiness. He cleared his throat, breaking my train of thought. I won't be gone long, he said, shrugging on his coat. Food's in the fridge. The kids don't have any allergies. Just put them to bed by 8, all right? Okay, I said, shifting on my feet. My stomach was tight, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. He left without another word, and suddenly I was standing there alone with 2 silent kids in a house that felt wrong. I tried to keep things normal. I found some coloring books and sat down at the kitchen table with them. The boy, Milo, I learned, drew quietly, his brow furrowed in concentration. But the girl, Emma, she didn't touch the books. She just stared at me, eyes wide, like she was trying to figure out what I was doing there. "You okay?" I asked, trying to break the silence. She didn't answer. After dinner, I noticed something else weird. The house wasn't just empty, it was hiding something. I had only seen 2 kids outside, but now, in the dim hallway, I counted 5. 2 identical twins, about 6, with dark curly hair, stood in the corner, not saying a word. A little girl, maybe 3, with jet black hair, was crouched by the stairs. That's when I realized. Milo, Emma, the twins, and the toddler. That's 5 kids. But Daniel had only mentioned 2. The twins didn't speak. The 3-year-old barely made a sound. And Emma, she just kept watching me. Her gaze was sharp, too sharp. By the time bedtime rolled around, the air felt thick, like something was pressing down on my chest. I couldn't name it, but I could feel it, like the house itself was holding its breath. Something wasn't right, and I was starting to wonder if I was the one who was supposed to leave. Then Emma walked up to me. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it sent a chill straight through my spine. "Don't eat the food," she said, eyes wide, her small hand pulling at the sleeve of my jacket. "Food? It makes you sleep." I crouched down to her level, trying to hide the rising panic. "What do you mean?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. Her big green eyes locked onto mine, intense and knowing, like she'd seen this before. "He does it every time," she whispered, glancing toward the door. She leaned in closer, her voice a threat of fear. "So we don't wake up." My throat tightened. "Who does?" Her gaze flicked toward the door again, then back to me. "He's not our dad," she said, almost too quietly to hear. "He takes kids. And when they don't listen, they don't come back." My heart pounded. I swallowed, trying to clear the knot in my throat. "What are you talking about, Emma?" The room felt like it was closing in on me. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone, typing in the address he'd given me. I checked my messages. Nothing, no texts, no missed calls. I searched the address on Google. Blank. There was nothing. No family records, no rental history, nothing. Then I heard it, the sound of a key turning in the lock. Daniel was home. I took a deep breath and tried to act normal. If Emma was right, I couldn't let him know that I suspected anything. I had to play it cool, at least for now. I smiled at him as he stepped inside, shaking my head, trying to steady my nerves. "Thanks for the job," I said, accepting the cash he handed me. He smiled back. "Need a ride home?" I felt a sick twist in my stomach. My gut screamed at me to refuse, but I forced myself to smile. "I'll take the bus," I said quickly. "Thanks, though," he chuckled. "Suit yourself." I stepped toward the door, but just as I reached for the handle, Emma's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. "Help us," she whispered urgently. Her words froze me in place. I looked around. At the windows, the empty rooms, the quiet house. 5 pairs of eyes, all watching. Silent. I had a choice to make. Walk away and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Or do something. I turned back to Daniel. "Actually," I said, forcing a laugh, "I forgot my jacket inside." He hesitated, then stepped aside. "All right, go ahead." I stepped back inside, my heart racing, my mind working in overdrive. What could I do? I had no weapon, no way to fight him if it came to that. But I couldn't leave them. "Not now," I whispered to Emma, my voice barely audible. "Get the others. Fast." Her eyes widened, but she nodded, turning and slipping down the hallway. I heard the soft patter of feet as the other kids moved quickly, gathering in the hallway behind me. I glanced around. Then, with a calm I didn't feel, I reached for the nearest object, a heavy lamp on a side table. I picked it up, holding my breath, and in one swift movement swung it hard at Daniel's head. He staggered back, cursing, and I didn't wait. I grabbed a chair and shoved it into his chest, pinning him against the wall. "Run!" I screamed at the kids. They didn't hesitate. They bolted past me, straight for the door. Daniel, furious, lunged toward me, but I was faster. I kicked him hard in the knee, and as he crumpled, I snatched the phone from his pocket. "Help!" I screamed into the receiver. "He's kidnapping kids." Daniel roared in fury, but I didn't care. The sirens were already blaring, coming from outside. The neighbors must have heard something. The police arrived minutes later, and when they stormed the house, they found the evidence: fake adoption papers, burner phones, and stacks of cash hidden all over the place. Daniel, or rather Matthew Cross, was arrested. He was a wanted human trafficker, known for kidnapping children, moving them from house to house, drugging them, and selling them to the highest bidder. The 5 kids were taken to safety. 3 of them turned out to be missing children from other states. And me? I quit babysitting after that. I couldn't shake the memory of that night, of Emma's eyes wide with fear and determination. If she hadn't warned me, if she hadn't pulled me back from the edge, I would have walked away thinking everything was fine. She saved them. She saved all of them. I still think about her sometimes, the way she looked at me, like she had already saved herself once before. I never paid much attention to my neighbors. I was a quiet kid, kept to myself, stayed out of trouble. But after that summer, I wish I had noticed more, because if I had, maybe I wouldn't have ended up running for my life. At the time, I was 16 and living with my Aunt Margot. My parents had been tearing each other apart for months over their divorce. They'd tried to hold it together, but it was just one explosion after another. Fights every night. Their voices cutting through the walls, plates shattering, door slamming. It never stopped. I couldn't take it anymore. So they sent me to Aunt Margot's. She lived in a small town about 2 hours away from the mess back home. She wasn't bad or anything, just kind of distant. She had her own life, worked from home, kept busy. But I didn't know anyone there, no friends, no family, just me, stuck in a sleepy little town where nothing ever happened, or so I thought. Aunt Margot had a neighbor named Eleanor. She was in her mid-50s, sharp as a tack, always perfectly put together. People around the neighborhood loved her, said she was classy. She hosted these little get-togethers, dinner parties with her fancy china, always making you feel like you were the only person in the room that mattered. She had this warmth that made it hard to dislike her. At first, I barely paid attention. I was just trying to adjust, keeping to myself. But after a while, there was no one else to talk to. I started hanging around Eleanor more. She'd invite me over for tea, and we'd sit in her living room chatting for hours. She would tell me stories about her late husband, a big game hunter who traveled the world. Her house was full of trophies from his trips, animal heads mounted on the walls, fur rugs draped over furniture, strange trinkets from Africa and South America. It felt like stepping into a museum. One day I asked if I could use her bathroom. On my way back, I noticed a door slightly ajar, tucked away in the corner of the house. It looked different, darker somehow. I couldn't help but walk toward it. Inside, the room was piled high with furs, stuffed animals, coats, and hides, all stacked haphazardly. Some furs were folded neatly on a wooden table, while others hung from the walls like they were frozen in time. I took a step closer and ran my fingers over one of them. The texture was strange, softer than I expected. Beautiful, aren't they? Eleanor's voice startled me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. She was standing behind me, watching with that same warm smile, but this time her eyes, something about them felt off. My husband was an artist with his craft, she said, stepping into the room. He knew how to preserve things, how to make them last forever. I nodded, trying to act interested, but my stomach churned. There was something about the way she said it that made my skin crawl. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But it wasn't just her. There was another neighbor, old Joe. He was in his 60s, always lurking around his porch, barely speaking to anyone. He had this look about him, like he knew something you didn't, like he was always watching you from the corner of his eye. Aunt Margot told me to ignore him. "He's harmless," she said. "Just a little strange." I tried to, but after what happened in Eleanor's room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Joe started staring at me more often, not just the casual glances. No, this was different. It was like he was waiting for something. One evening, I was heading back from Eleanor's house when I saw Joe again. He was standing at the edge of his property, just like usual, his eyes fixed on me. This time, though, when I met his gaze, he lifted his hand and pointed straight at Eleanor's house. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Stay away," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Before I could say anything, he turned and walked back inside his house. The way he said it, the look in his eyes, it made my heart skip a beat. That night, Aunt Margot told me that my parents had worked things out, and I'd be going home in a week. I should have been relieved, but all I could think about was Eleanor. The next day, I went to tell her I was leaving. She seemed genuinely sad, even hugged me. She invited me over for tea that evening. One last time. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. I wish I hadn't. That night, when I walked up to Eleanor's porch, a hand grabbed my wrist. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. Joe was standing there, his grip tight on my wrist like steel. His face was twisted with something close to panic. "Don't go inside," he hissed, his voice urgent and raw. "What the hell, Joe?" I yanked my arm back, struggling to break free. "Let go of me!" He didn't budge. His eyes were wild, frantic, like he was trying to tell me something but couldn't find the words. Then, without warning, he grabbed the collar of my shirt and yanked me close. "She collects them," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "People." My stomach dropped. It was like a switch had been flipped in my brain. Something in his voice, the panic, the desperation, it was enough to make the blood in my veins run cold. Before I could react, he shoved something into my hand, a crumpled piece of paper, and bolted toward his house, not saying another word. My fingers shook as I unfolded it, the paper creasing under the pressure. The words were scrawled, barely legible, in a frantic hand. I was supposed to be the first. You were supposed to be next. A chill ran through me, icy fingers crawling up my spine. My breath caught in my throat, my pulse roaring in my ears. I barely had time to process it when I heard it. A door creaking open behind me. "Tom." Eleanor's voice floated out, soft, warm, inviting. "Come inside." My legs turned to stone. The air in my lungs seemed to freeze, my heart hammering so loud I thought it might shatter my ribs. "Run." The thought screamed in my head, but before I could move, a sharp pain pierced my neck. I gasped, vision blurring, the world tipping like I was falling down a never-ending well. My knees buckled beneath me and I collapsed forward. Eleanor was there, catching me as I fell, her touch unnervingly gentle. There, she cooed, her voice soft as she stroked my hair. "It'll be over soon." The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was the glint of a blade in her hand. When I woke up, my arms ached, and cold metal pressed against my skin. I was tied to a chair, my body heavy and sluggish, but my mind was racing. The room was familiar, the fur room, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw the truth. The furs, they weren't just animal hides. Some of them had tattoos, human tattoos. I screamed, panic clawing at my throat. From the shadows, Eleanor emerged, her face unnervingly calm, almost serene. She stood in front of me, smiling that same smile that had once made me feel so special. "You were always my favorite, Tom," she said, her voice smooth, almost affectionate. "You have such beautiful skin." She lifted the knife, pressing the cool steel gently against my arm. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I'll make you last forever." I thrashed against the restraints, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave. But then, bang! The door exploded open. Joe was standing there, a shotgun in hand, his eyes wild with fury. Eleanor barely had time to turn before he fired. The blast hit her square in the chest, sending her sprawling backward, crashing to the floor. In seconds, Joe was beside me, slashing at the ropes with frantic urgency. My body felt weak, my vision still hazy from whatever she'd drugged me with, but I forced myself to my feet. "Move," Joe barked, grabbing my arm. His voice was rough, almost desperate. We stumbled out of the house, my legs barely holding me up. I could hear sirens in the distance. Aunt Margot must have called the cops. Behind us, Eleanor's shrill, inhuman scream echoed through the night, then silence. The police found everything. The human skins, the tools, the trophies she had collected over the years. The horror she had hidden in plain sight for so long. It wasn't her first time. Joe had survived one of her attacks years ago. She had taken his brother, mutilated him, and Joe had been hunting her ever since. He knew what she was. That's why he'd always watched her. He knew. I moved back home soon after, but nothing felt the same. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. I heard her voice, soft and sweet, like she was still standing right behind me. And even now, years later, when I pass an old woman on the street, I can feel it. An icy hand gripping my spine, a whisper in my ear. Because sometimes the kindest faces hide the darkest horrors. Long before all this started, before the sleepless nights and the police and the locked doors, I was just a broke 19-year-old college student trying to find a place to live. That's really where the story begins. Not with a scream in the dark or an eye at the door, but with desperation. The kind that makes you ignore red flags because you can't afford to be picky. The kind that makes hope feel like a dangerous thing, sharp and bright and blinding if you stare too hard. It was the summer before my sophomore year at Emerson Valley University. A hot, sticky July that made the sidewalks feel like they'd melt your sneakers clean off. I just lost out on the student housing lottery, which meant dorm life was off the table. Emerson had this policy. Second years had to live off campus unless you had a medical exemption. I didn't. So there I was, back in my hometown of Deerfield, Illinois, population less than 10,000, home of 3 churches, 2 diners, and 1 blinking red light, trying to figure out how to survive the upcoming school year without going into debt or losing my mind. Off-campus housing near Emerson was a nightmare. Everything within walking distance was either crumbling apart or way out of my price range. I had just enough saved from my part-time job at the theater to cover a deposit and maybe 2 months of rent if I stretched. But beyond that, I was screwed unless I found someone to split costs. Fast. I posted ads wherever I could. Craigslist, Emerson student classifieds, even Facebook groups. Quiet, responsible student looking for roommate to split rent on a 2-bedroom near campus. Clean, non-smoker, serious about school. Message if interested. It wasn't much, but it was honest. I figured maybe some other student was in the same boat. I posted it just before 10 one night, ate some microwaved noodles, and went to bed hoping for the best. At 10:01 p.m. I got a response. Her name was Elaine Barrett. She said she was recently widowed and needed to downsize. Said she was quiet, respectful, and liked being around students. That she had no pets, didn't smoke, didn't make noise. I reread her message 3 times, especially the part where she mentioned she was 71. It gave me pause. But then again, who was I to question it? She sounded nice, her writing was polite, and she offered to pay half the rent without hesitation. She said she liked quiet, didn't watch TV, and wouldn't be a bother. And no one else messaged me that week. By the end of August, I'd signed a lease for a small brick duplex 5 blocks from campus. It was nothing fancy. Creaky floors, yellowed blinds, weird smell in the closet that never quite went away. But it was clean, and it was ours. The front yard had a big oak tree that shaded the porch. I picked the larger room because Elaine insisted. Said the bay window would be nice for studying. She moved in with 1 suitcase and a single box. Said she didn't believe in clutter. I remember watching her shuffle up the walkway in a long gray skirt and cardigan despite the heat, white hair twisted into a bun smelling like lavender and old paper. She was tiny, barely came up to my shoulder, but her handshake was firm. We settled in easy enough. Elaine was quiet, almost invisible. I'd get home from class and the house would be still, save for the occasional soft clink of her spoon against her teacup. We didn't talk much. Just polite hellos, shared smiles in the hallway, the occasional comment about the weather or the food I was making. Honestly, she was the dream roommate, until the giggling started. The first night, I was writing a paper on the living room floor when I heard it. Faint, high-pitched laughter coming from behind her closed door. It wasn't creepy at first. I thought maybe she was watching an old movie or talking on the phone, but it kept going. Not words, no conversation. Just these short, sharp giggles, spaced out like someone reacting to something I couldn't hear. It felt off, like a laugh without joy. It happened again the next night, and the night after that. Each time I'd pause and listen, trying to convince myself it was harmless. Just an old woman with an odd sense of humor. But something about it made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the sound, it was the fact that there was never any other noise. No voice, no footsteps, just laughter, like she was watching something inside her own head. Then I started noticing her staring. At first I chalked it up to me being jumpy. I'd glance up from the couch and see her standing in the hallway just watching me, hands clasped in front of her, face unreadable, a small vague smile on her lips. She never said anything, just stood there, half in shadow, and watched. When I greeted her, she'd nod and turn away. It kept happening. Always quiet, always distant, until it wasn't. One night in mid-October, I woke up to a tapping sound. Soft, steady, from the other side of my bedroom door. I sat up, heart thudding, frozen in place. It wasn't knocking, it wasn't urgent, it was playful, rhythmic, like a child tapping out a beat. I waited, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. I whispered, "Elaine?" The tapping stopped instantly, then, giggling, that same girlish, too-high laugh, just inches from my door. I didn't move, couldn't move. My door didn't have a lock. The next morning, I waited for her in the kitchen. She was sipping tea when I asked as casually as I could, "Hey, were you up late last night?" She blinked slowly. "Oh no, dear. I went to bed early. I thought I heard something outside my door," I said. She smiled wide and slow. "Dreams can be very loud, can't they?" That was the last time I tried confronting her. That night I shoved my desk in front of the door, just in case. It didn't help. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of the door handle rattling. Not tapping, not giggling. She was trying to open the door. I pressed my weight against the desk, hard in my throat, feeling the wood shift beneath each shove. Then, stillness. Silence. And then I saw it. An eye, pressed to the tiny crack between the door and the frame, watching me. She didn't blink. Then she screamed, loud, piercing, my name, words I didn't understand. "You shouldn't be here." Slam, slam, slam. The desk thudded forward with each impact. I screamed back, pushing against it, yelling for her to stop. And just as suddenly as it began, silence. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, I was still pressed against the door. When I opened it, I nearly threw up. Every kitchen knife we owned had been stabbed into the door. Some were buried to the hilt. Others hung loosely. The wood looked like it had been chewed up by steel. Elaine didn't answer her door at first. One officer knocked. The other held me gently as I explained. Her staring, the laughter, the screaming. They had to drag her out. She kicked, screamed about blood in the walls, said I wasn't real, that I had brought them. She never looked at me. A month later, I'd moved into a 2-bedroom across town with 2 other students. It was cramped, but I slept through the night. That felt like a miracle. The officer who followed up told me Elaine Barrett didn't exist. No birth certificate. No death record for a husband. No medical history. The ID was fake. The landlord said she paid him in cash after replying to a Craigslist ad. No background check. No emergency contact. I still don't know who she was or what she wanted. But I'll never forget that eye. Watching me like she wasn't just seeing me, she was waiting. So here's the question. If someone wanted to watch you, really watch you, how long do you think it would take before you noticed? I understood what real fear was. I lived in a quiet corner of western Pennsylvania, with my parents in a creaky farmhouse at the end of Maple Hollow Road. It was one of those places that looked calm on the outside, but held a kind of stillness that could make your chest feel tight if you stood in it too long. When I was a kid, 10 years old to be exact, I thought the world was just wide open space and time, filled with nothing more than long days at school and chores in the evening. But looking back now, I realized the danger that came that summer had been sitting quietly beside us for years, cloaked in silence, living just past our fence line in a house that should have never had its windows painted shut. My name is Emily Saunders. Back then, I was just a lanky kid with a habit of reading too late into the night and a head full of questions I was too afraid to ask out loud. Our house sat on a hilltop, right where the pavement of Maple Hollow turned into gravel and the woods began to thicken. The nearest neighbor was a good 15-minute walk, and it wasn't unusual to go a whole day without seeing anyone pass by. That stretch of road felt endless when you were walking home from Miller Elementary with your backpack digging into your shoulders and the wind sneaking through the trees. There was one house, though, close enough to ours that I had to pass it every day. The Grayson place. It looked like something out of a forgotten postcard. 2 stories, chipped paint, shutters hanging sideways. But what made it stick in my memory, even back then, were the windows. Every single one of them was painted over in thick white spray paint. You couldn't see a thing inside, not even shadows. That alone was enough to send a chill down my spine, but it was the man inside that truly made my stomach twist. Mr. Grayson was older than anyone I'd ever met. Thin, hunched, pale as a sheet with gray stubble like sandpaper across his jaw. He wore the same clothes every day, faded jeans, a plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and boots caked with dried mud. He always seemed to be there when I passed by, just standing, watching. His porch sagged under his weight, and when he spoke, it was with a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in years. "Hey, Emily," he'd call out. He never said it like a neighbor. It didn't feel like a greeting. It felt more like a test, like he was watching to see how I'd respond. I never said anything back, just tightened my grip on my backpack straps and kept walking. My parents knew he was strange. Everyone in town did. But they didn't think he was dangerous. And back then, it was easy for adults to brush off a kid's discomfort as just imagination. I never had the nerve to tell them everything I felt. The way his eyes followed me, the way I felt like I was being studied. At night, lying in bed, I'd sometimes hear things outside. Twigs snapping, the wind brushing against the old window frames. I'd try to tell myself it was just animals or the house settling. But some nights I'd see something more. A flicker of light. A faint beam moving across the backyard, too slow to be a passing car, too directed to be anything natural. I'd hold my breath and stay still under the covers, hoping it would go away. It usually did, until the night it didn't. It was late July. I remember the heat pressing against my skin like a heavy blanket. The box fan in my room was humming and the air felt thick. I'd just started to drift off when I heard a sound I knew wasn't the wind. A soft thud, then another. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. I peeked through the curtain. There was a flashlight beam moving across the grass. Then it stopped. It tilted upward slowly toward my window. I scrambled back, breath stuck in my throat. I knew it was him, even before I saw the ladder. I'd seen that ladder before, leaned against the side of Mr. Grayson's porch during the day. But now it was propped against the side of our house, just below my bedroom window. And then I saw him, his face just inches from the glass. Pale, empty eyes, that same unreadable expression. His fingers tapped lightly on the pane, slow and rhythmic. I screamed. My parents came running. I couldn't get the words out fast enough. "He's at my window. He climbed up." My dad rushed out with a flashlight. My mom held me tight while I shook. But there was no one there. No ladder. No footprints. Just an empty yard and the buzz of crickets. "Are you sure it wasn't a dream?" my dad asked gently, brushing my hair away from my face. "I'm sure," I said. "It was real. He was there. I saw him." They didn't say much after that. They checked the locks, told me to try to sleep. But I knew they didn't fully believe me. And then, just like that, Mr. Grayson disappeared. The house went up for sale the following week. The windows stayed painted, the yard still wild and overgrown. But he was gone. No one saw him leave. No one even knew where he went. Some folks said he moved in with relatives in Ohio. Others thought he died and no one noticed for a while. I never got an answer. Just a vacancy where fear used to sit. I didn't sleep well for a long time after that. Even with the house empty, I'd wake up in the middle of the night staring at the window, half expecting to see his face again. I started locking it, double-checking, sometimes even wedging a chair under the handle just to be sure. My parents said I was being paranoid, but I didn't care. I knew what I'd seen. Months passed. Then a young couple moved in with their 2 kids. They cleaned up the yard, scraped off the window paint, added flower boxes under the windows. It looked like a home again. I tried to feel happy about it. I even watched the kids play in the front yard, laughing and chasing each other around the big oak tree. But inside, I still felt that tight, quiet fear that had lived with me for too long. One evening, I found my mom sitting on the porch swing, sipping sweet tea and staring at the horizon. I sat beside her, the air cool and soft with the smell of rain on dry earth. "Mom," I said after a long silence, "do you remember the man who used to live next door?" She nodded but didn't speak. "I never told you everything," I said. "I was scared you'd think I was lying." Her expression softened. "Emily, sometimes grown-ups don't understand what kids see or feel. I should have listened better." There was comfort in her words. Small, but real. I nodded, but deep down, I knew it didn't erase what had happened. Years later, I still carry that night with me. Still flinch when I hear a soft knock on a window or see a flashlight beam in the dark. People think danger comes loud and fast, but the truth is, sometimes it creeps in slow and quiet, behind painted windows, through the silence of a place that feels too still. I wonder sometimes, what if Daniel, our dog, hadn't barked that night? What if my scream hadn't startled him? What if I hadn't tied the backyard gate tighter earlier that week? Would I still be here? And more importantly, how many others stay quiet because they think no one will believe them? I never thought I'd leave the city for good. Not really. Lucas and I used to toss the idea around in that vague, someday kind of way, like when the kids are older, when we finally catch up on bills, when work gets less hectic. But last fall, something snapped. We were eating cold lo mein out of the takeout boxes, sitting on the couch while the twins coughed in their room, and it hit me all at once. The ceiling above our bathroom had collapsed again from the upstairs flooding. Mold was creeping in along the baseboards. The landlord shrugged it off like always. A shooting had happened a few blocks away the week before. I looked at Lucas and said, "What if we just left?" And for once, he didn't laugh or say we were too broke or tired. He just looked at me and said, yeah, maybe we should." 3 months later, we packed everything we owned into a moving truck and drove 2.5 hours out of the city to a place called Juniper Hollow, population 612. Our new home was a plain white farmhouse sitting on 5 acres of grass and trees. The porch creaked, the floors leaned in spots, and the kitchen cabinets were warped. But the air smelled like cut hay, and the wind rustling through the grass sounded like breath. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a chance. The town was small, really small. 1 diner, a feed store, and a single pump gas station. We were 40 minutes from anything bigger. The people waved when they passed, whether they knew you or not. For the first few weeks, it was almost dreamlike. The twins ran barefoot through the fields until dusk. I started a garden. Lucas put up shelves and we painted the living room together. There were moments when I thought maybe we'd finally found a place to grow old. And then I met Harold. It was early March. The frost had just started lifting in the mornings, and I was walking back from the mailbox, arms full of catalogs and junk mail, when I noticed him across the gravel road, kneeling in his yard, trimming flower beds with an old pair of shears. He stood when he saw me. Tall, wiry, silver hair slicked back, and a face that looked 20 years younger than his posture suggested. "Morning," he called out, voice clear and deep. "Good morning," I replied, smiling. "You must be our neighbor." He crossed the road in long, confident strides. "You're the ones bought the Miller place." "That's us. I'm Claire." "Harold," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was dry and strong. "Been out here my whole life. Most of us around here are related more or less. My daughter Maggie's down that way and my nephew's just to the east of you." His eyes were a bright, piercing blue, the kind that don't blink much. I figured he was maybe in his early 60s. Later that night, Lucas told me Harold was 82. That was the first thing that didn't quite sit right with me. Harold came by a few days later while I was pulling weeds near the barn. He didn't say hello, just walked right up like he owned the place. "Just so you know," he said, nodding at the yard, "you ought to mow every 5 days. Keep it from getting wild." I blinked at him. "Oh, the front yard, sure. We were planning to let the backfield grow for a hay cut in late spring." He stared at me, his face blank for a second before forcing a thin smile. Still best to keep things neat. Then he paused and added, "If you need anything, it's best to send your husband or call my wife. Best not to come to me directly." I laughed awkwardly. "You mean if we need tools or something?" "In general," he said, and looked me over in a way that wasn't sexual. It was colder, more clinical. "You'd look more motherly if you grew your hair out." Before I could respond, he turned and walked off. When I told Lucas that night, he shrugged. He's just old school. Probably thinks he's being helpful. I wasn't so sure. A week later, Harold's daughter Maggie stopped by while I was planting tomatoes and invited me over for tea. She seemed sweet, soft-spoken, always out pruning her garden or folding laundry on her porch. I thought maybe I'd just misunderstood Harold. Maybe this was just how people were here, blunt, set in their ways, a little odd. Her house was tidy, filled with floral doilies and old-fashioned curtains. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and herbal tea. We made small talk about schools and weather and compost. Then her phone rang. "Sorry, one sec," she said, stepping into the hallway. I sat alone in the kitchen for what felt like several minutes. I stood up, stretched a little, and casually glanced down the hall. At the end was a door. Unlike the rest of the house, which was comfortably worn, this door looked newer, sturdy, out of place. The paint around the frame was fresh, and there were 3 deadbolts stacked vertically. I squinted. The wood beneath the handle was scratched up, deep gouges. I took a hesitant step forward. "Just storage," Maggie said behind me, too quickly. I jumped. She was standing in the hallway now, smiling wider than before. "Old root cellar, unsafe floor. We don't go down there." She ushered me back to the kitchen, too gently. I didn't ask anything else. That night, walking past Maggie's house toward our mailbox, I saw it. One of the small basement windows was just above ground. There was a handprint on it, small, child-sized, perfectly pressed. No smudge, no dirt, just a clean hand pressed hard into the glass, like it had been waiting. I told Lucas. He said maybe one of her grandkids had been playing, or maybe it was from cleaning. But there was no rain, no dust streaks, just that one perfect handprint. We tried to ignore it. Focus on the house, the kids, the chores. Pretend it was all fine. Then came the night the boys started crying at 2 a.m. Lucas went to check. I looked out the window and saw fresh tire tracks through the grass leading toward the barn. Our cameras completely blank. Not glitchy, not fuzzy, just wiped clean. The footage for that night? Gone. Lucas replaced the SD cards, set up cloud backups. Neither of us talked about what we were thinking. The last straw came a few days later. I was hanging sheets on the line, enjoying the wind and sun, when I felt it. That buzz at the back of your neck when someone's watching you. I turned and there he was, Harold, standing at the edge of our field. No wave, no smile, just staring. Then he pointed, not at me, at the tree line. "Don't dig there," he said, then turned and walked away. I hadn't planned to dig, not until he said that. The next afternoon, Lucas was in town and the kids were napping. I grabbed a shovel and walked to the spot. The earth was soft, like it had been disturbed before. About 6 inches down, I hit something solid. It was a metal box, rusted and dented. I pulled it out, dragged it behind the barn, and forced it open. Inside were photographs. Dozens, black and white, brittle with age. Every photo showed a family standing in front of our farmhouse. Different people, different decades, babies, children, parents. But in every single photo standing off to the side was Harold, unchanged. Same eyes, same face, same Harold. I stared for what felt like hours. My hands were shaking. I put the photos in a bag and walked straight to Harold's house. His wife answered, a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. "I need to speak with Harold," I said. She looked at me like I'd asked something impossible. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "Harold passed away nearly 3 years ago." I blinked. "No, that's not possible." He was just at our fence yesterday." She shook her head. "That's not possible," she repeated softly. Back at home, I laid the photos out on the floor. One had a year scrawled on the back, 1979. Another, 1954. The same house, different families. Always Harold, just off to the side, watching. I went online that night, dug through county records, archived newspapers. The farmhouse had changed owners over a dozen times in 60 years. Some families moved abruptly, others disappeared without selling. One article mentioned a family of 4, presumed missing. No foul play ever confirmed. I showed everything to Lucas. Neither of us slept. We tried to move a week later. The U-Haul wouldn't start. The old truck overheated. Our internet cut out the moment I tried to send an email. When I called the sheriff, he came by and looked around with this tired, patient expression. "Some places don't like being left behind," he said. Then he smiled. It was the same smile Harold wore in every photo. That night, someone knocked at 3:12 a.m. Lucas checked. No one there. But on the porch was a fresh photograph. Us, standing in front of the house. And there, off to the side, was Harold, smiling. What if the real danger isn't a person, but the land that never forgets who you are or lets you leave? My life was quiet in the kind of way you don't notice until it's gone. I was 24, working remote contract jobs in digital marketing, and living just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, in a mid-sized apartment complex called Wellington Hills. It was one of those cookie-cutter places with beige siding, perfectly trimmed bushes, and laminated flyers taped to stairwells about dog waste fines and community appreciation days. The rent was just affordable enough to make sense, and the location, close enough to everything but tucked far enough from the city, felt like the right kind of middle ground. I lived with my best friend, Maya Green. She was 23, sharp-tongued, fast-talking, and completely allergic to subtlety. Maya had an opinion about everything, a laugh you could hear through walls, and a weird talent for guessing people's Starbucks orders after one glance. We met freshman year of college and somehow never drifted. When we moved into Unit 305 in Building C, we both felt like we were doing something right, like we'd leveled up. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, laminate floors that creaked in weird spots, and a little balcony that overlooked the parking lot and a crooked row of pine trees. But it felt safe, familiar, ours. Maya's older brother's a cop, so she's always been hyper-aware of safety. The first thing she did after we moved in was install a Ring peephole cam and a digital keypad lock. I rolled my eyes, teased her about acting like we were prepping for a zombie apocalypse, but she didn't budge. She said, "I'd rather look paranoid than be dead." I used to laugh. I don't laugh anymore. The first few months were boring in the best way. We had neighbors who nodded at us in passing, an older couple downstairs who occasionally dropped off muffins or banana bread, and a noisy toddler across the hall who cried like it was a competitive sport. The couple with the toddler, the Petersons, moved out in February. We noticed the for lease sign on their door a few days later. Maya assumed the unit would stay empty a while since our property manager was notoriously picky. But by early March, we saw a moving truck in the lot. The new guy moved in alone, mid-30s, maybe older. He was thin, almost gaunt, always wearing long sleeves even when the weather started warming up. He never introduced himself, never nodded, never made eye contact. Sometimes I'd hear his door lock turning or his keys jingling, but that was it. No greetings, no small talk, nothing. His blinds stayed drawn all day. His lights barely came on at night. Maya said maybe he worked nights at a hospital or a factory, but I wasn't convinced. Then came the sounds. At first, it was just a faint scraping noise late at night, like furniture being dragged across the floor. We were watching a movie the first time we heard it. It was low and slow, like someone was pulling something heavy with effort. We muted the TV. The noise stopped. We looked at each other and shrugged it off. But it kept happening, every night, sometimes at midnight, sometimes closer to 4 a.m. Dragging, then footsteps, slow, measured. We told ourselves maybe he was rearranging things, maybe he had insomnia, but you can only hear the same sound so many nights before it stops sounding innocent. Maya was the first to say it. "It's not normal," she whispered one night as we both sat in silence, listening. "Nobody rearranges their furniture at 3 a.m. every single day." The sounds escalated, muted voices, low and hurried, like he was arguing with someone, except we never heard another voice. Just his, agitated, raspy, like he was fighting a ghost or losing a fight in his own head. We didn't call the police, we didn't complain. We weren't sure what to say. "Hi, our neighbor sounds like a horror movie character. Could you check that out?" We tried to laugh it off, but we started locking our doors tighter at night. Maya stopped sleeping without her pepper spray within reach. I moved a metal bat next to my nightstand. One Thursday night, things changed. I'd just come home from a late shift around midnight. Maya was already in bed. At 1:30 a.m., she got up for water and saw him, standing in front of our door, not knocking, not moving, just standing there. She froze, said hi in a quiet voice. He didn't respond, didn't blink, just turned slowly and walked back to his apartment. She told me in the morning, trying to laugh, but her eyes were tight and scared. I checked the ring footage. He stood there for almost 4 minutes, staring into the peephole. 4 minutes, completely still. That's when the alert started. Motion detected. Every night between 1 and 3 a.m. when we'd get a ping. Sometimes twice. He'd walk past our door slowly, like he was doing rounds. Other times he'd stop, stand there, or worse, reach for the doorknob. Once, we caught him whispering into the keyhole. We played it back, muted, then turned the volume up. It was unintelligible, raspy and broken, but deliberate, like he was talking to us directly, or someone else. We didn't know which was worse. Then came the scratches. Long, deep gashes across the surface of our front door, not once, not twice. Over and over, new ones appearing every couple nights, like someone was carving with a key, or something sharper. We reported it. The leasing office barely blinked. "We'll look into it," they said. "We'll check the hallway camera." A day later, they admitted the camera hadn't worked for months. We showed them the ring footage. "Well," they said, "he hasn't technically done anything illegal." I remember the way Maya's face fell. She didn't say a word until we got back inside. Then she slammed the door and muttered, "They won't care until he stabs one of us through the mail slot." We started doubling down, locking the door, reinforcing it with a chair, leaving hallway lights on all night. We even pushed a dresser in front of our shared bedroom door. We didn't talk about it anymore. We just acted. Then came the worst night, a Tuesday. It was 1:37 a.m. I just ended a video call with my sister. Maya had dozed off beside me on the couch. Then, 3 hard, fast bangs on the door. I froze. Maya jolted upright. I grabbed my phone and opened the Ring app. My hands were shaking. He was there, shirtless, wide-eyed, pressed up against the peephole, staring into it like he could see us through it. Then he whispered something, deliberate, rhythmic. We couldn't make it out. Then he screamed. It wasn't human. It was the kind of sound that rips into your stomach, the kind that makes your body move before your brain catches up. We ran, locked ourselves in the bedroom, pushed the dresser harder against the door. I called 911. The dispatcher was calm, like this was normal. She told us to stay put, stay quiet, don't engage. We listened. We crouched in the corner of the room, Maya's hand locked around her pepper spray, her knees shaking. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat more than anything else. The banging stopped. Then silence. Police arrived 34 minutes later. By the time they knocked, it was like nothing had happened. He didn't answer. They tried the handle. Nothing. Unless he broke in or had a weapon, one officer said. There's not much we can do. That was it. That was all they had. Maya didn't say anything. She walked into her room and pulled her suitcase from under the bed. We packed. Before the sun rose, we were gone. We stayed with her aunt 2 towns over and filed another report. Nothing ever came of it. The leasing office said they'd investigate. The apartment across from ours stayed occupied for months. We never heard from him again. We never learned his name. Never found out why he picked our door. Why he stood there whispering. What he thought he'd find inside. All we knew was that we listened to our fear. We didn't stay to figure it out. And maybe that saved us. But I still think about him. Still hear that whisper sometimes in my sleep. Still wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't left? And now I ask you, what would you have done? I never thought I'd come back to Elmbridge. For most of my adult life, I'd done everything I could to leave it behind. I spent years chasing bigger cities, louder lives, things that made me feel important. But after the breakup, after everything, I didn't have much left in the tank. My job had drained me to the bone, then let me go like I'd never mattered in the first place. I was tired, mentally, physically. So when my parents called and told me they were moving to Arizona and offered me the old house, I said yes without really thinking. Maybe I was too numb to argue, or maybe, deep down, I needed someplace quiet to fall apart. The house was still the same low-slung ranch-style place tucked at the edge of town between 2 dead-end streets. It looked smaller than I remembered, but maybe that's just what time does. The lawn had gone patchy. The porch creaked in new places. But it was mine now, and it felt like the only thing left that I didn't have to fight for. It was late June when I moved in, and the summer air was thick like soup. I spent the first couple weeks working on small repairs, fixed a window, replaced a loose tile, tried to make it feel like mine. The basement, though, that was where I really found myself settling. It used to be the rec room when I was a kid. I'd turned it into an office, started patching drywall on the far wall where a crack had spidered out over the years. There was something comforting about the cool air down there, the stillness. It made me feel separated from everything that had gone wrong in my life. I was sanding a joint near the ceiling when the first text came in. It was around 12:08 a.m., and I had my gaming headset on, half distracted by some dumb podcast playing in the background. I barely looked at the message when it buzzed through. It was from Evelyn Kane, my next-door neighbor. 70-something, nosy in the way only small-town folks can be. But she meant well. Always did. "Hey, honey. Just saw a tall guy walk into your basement. Wanted to let you know." I didn't even pause at first. Texted back with one hand, still balancing on the stepladder. "You sure? Pretty sure I'd notice." Her reply came quick. "Yep, he ducked under your doorframe. Real tall. Thought maybe you had a friend over." That made me stop. I hadn't seen another human being in hours. I spun around in my chair and scanned the room. Everything was exactly where I left it. Tools in the corner, drywall dust in the air, music still low from my phone speaker. The back door to the basement was closed, but I always left it like that. It never shut properly unless you latched it from the outside. I muted the podcast and stood perfectly still. No footsteps, no shadows, nothing. I walked over to the door, cracked it an inch, peeked outside. Empty yard, the camper I never used sitting just where it always had, and the chain link fence beyond. No sign of movement. I texted her again. "I'm down here, alone. Are you totally sure?" She didn't respond. I chalked it up to a mistake. Maybe she saw someone walking along the alley and thought they turned in. Maybe her porch light played tricks. She was old, not blind, but still. It's late. People get jumpy. I went back to my chair. At 12:42 a.m., she texted again. "He just left." My heart skipped. I stared at the screen. "Left from where?" "From your basement. Walked out and down toward your camper." I tried to follow with my flashlight, but he never came out the other side. He just didn't. That made my stomach clench. There's nowhere to go back there. The camper sits in a dead space between the house and fence. If someone walked in and didn't walk out, they'd still be there. Or they'd jump the fence. But who does that? I got up and did a slow lap around the basement. No extra footprints, nothing out of place, just my Crocs squeaking against the concrete floor and the faint smell of drywall. It was like no one had ever been there. Still, the unease crawled under my skin. I grabbed a flashlight, popped the window screen, and climbed out the narrow opening near the ceiling. I'd done it before in winter, when I'd locked myself out. It wasn't graceful, but I made it out. The basement door opened fine from the outside. No jam, no resistance. I checked around the camper. Empty. No tracks in the dirt. Nothing disturbed. Then I walked across to Evelyn's place. She was sitting on her porch like always, mug in hand, blanket over her knees. Porch light buzzing like a tired fly. "You okay?" she asked before I even got close. "Yeah," I said, brushing dirt from my jeans. "Just, what exactly did you see?" She gave me this long look over her glasses. Tall guy, dressed all in black. Hood up, I think. Moved slow, like he was real comfortable. Came up to your door, stood there for a sec, then let himself in. "Could you see his face?" She shook her head. "Nah. He stayed in the shadows. But it wasn't some drunk kid or whatever. He moved like he knew where he was going." I ran a hand through my hair, still damp from the basement's cool air. "You're sure?" "Ian," she said, setting her mug down. "I'm old, not stupid. That man walked into your house." Then, with a smirk, she added, "Was he cute?" I rolled my eyes. "Really?" She shrugged. "What, I can't try to lighten the mood?" I walked home, jumped the fence, and did a full check of the house. Upstairs, downstairs, closets, under beds, cabinets, nothing. Everything in place. But I couldn't relax. I stayed up pacing, washing a dish that didn't need it, straightening the pictures on the wall like that somehow made things safer. Then came the bang. Not a crash, not a thud. A bang, like wood splitting, or something heavy hitting a wall. I stopped cold. Heart racing, I grabbed the nearest thing with weight, an old brass lamp, and crept down the stairs. The basement looked untouched. Tools where I left them. Air still cool. No broken shelves, no mess. But the back door was jammed again, totally stuck. Same as before. This time, there was breath fog on the inside of the window. I stared at it for a long time, chest tight. It hadn't been there earlier. The room wasn't cold enough for condensation. I pressed my palm against the glass. It was warm, like someone had stood there for a long time. I tried everything to get the door open, crowbar, shoving, nothing worked. Finally, I grabbed my phone to call someone, but it was dead. Totally dead. No red light, no Apple logo, nothing. It had been charging all day. I put it back on the charger, no change. Then, an hour later, the screen flickered. Battery 1%. By the time it crawled to 50%, I tried the door again. It opened without a sound. That was 5 nights ago. I haven't gone back in the basement since. I don't know what Evelyn saw. I don't know why the door locked itself twice. I don't understand the breath on the glass or the way my phone drained like that. But I do know I was alone. At least I thought I was. And here's the question I can't stop asking. If you knew someone, or something, had been inside your home and left without a trace, would you ever feel safe there again? I bought the house 2 years ago after my divorce. It was built in the late 60s, a 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet corner of town with an unfinished basement, an overgrown backyard, and just enough space for a man starting over. The price was almost suspiciously low, but I convinced myself it was just the market. The place needed work, sure, but it felt like something I could make mine. A fresh start. I painted the kitchen myself, replaced the cracked tiles in the bathroom, even built shelves in the basement for tools I barely used. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The neighborhood was quiet. Retirees mostly, some families. Mrs. Barker, who lived next door, was friendly in a cautious sort of way. She baked once a week, usually banana bread, and gave me half without asking. Said she liked to keep tabs on the street since her husband died. She noticed everything. At first, I found it a little annoying. Later, I'd be grateful. The first time I heard the sound, it was past midnight. I was in bed, halfway between sleep and dreams, when something creaked under the floorboards. Not the casual pop of settling wood. This was deliberate, heavy, like someone was shifting their weight in the basement right beneath me. I sat up, listened hard, but it stopped. Told myself it was nothing, maybe the water heater or a raccoon outside. I didn't go check. I was too tired, and honestly, I didn't want to go down there. A few nights later, it happened again. Same time, same soft creak. I grabbed a flashlight, went down to the basement with my heart hammering in my chest. The light cast long shadows on the concrete walls, bouncing off the clutter I hadn't touched in months. Nothing moved, no signs of anyone breaking in. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just adjusting to living alone again. Still, I started locking the basement door at night. One Saturday morning, I noticed the lock on the basement door had been scratched, like someone had tried to mess with it using something sharp. That's when I started getting serious. I installed a bolt lock. I kept a kitchen knife on my nightstand. I told a couple friends, but they brushed it off. Old houses creak, man. Stop watching those late-night horror clips. I laughed along with them, but I kept my ears open at night. Then came the evening the door jammed. It was a Friday. I was working on the pipes under the kitchen sink when I realized I left a fitting in the basement. I went to get it. The basement door opened normally, but when I tried to come back up, it wouldn't budge. The knob turned, but the door stuck like it was being held from the other side. I knocked, then shoved it. Nothing. I pounded harder, now sweating, heart racing. My phone was in my pocket. No signal. Not even one bar. I tried to calm down, waited 10 minutes, tried again. Suddenly the door opened smooth as butter. When I checked my phone, it was back to full signal. Battery at 62%. Everything worked fine. That night I bolted the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and texted Mrs. Barker. All I said was, "Did you see anything else?" She replied 5 minutes later, "He's not in your yard anymore." That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. I decided to sleep in the spare room upstairs. It was always too hot up there, but I didn't care. I shut off all the lights, grabbed a kitchen knife, and locked the bedroom door behind me. I lay on top of the covers listening. Every creak sounded like footsteps. I must have dozed off eventually, but it wasn't restful. I dreamt of crawling things, long arms and narrow joints, something hiding just beneath the boards. The next morning, the sun made the curtains glow like nothing had ever happened. Warm, normal light. I almost laughed. Maybe I was spiraling. Stress, isolation, caffeine, late-night paranoia. I told myself all of it made sense. Then my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Barker again. "Hey, just wanted to let you know my camera picked up something weird around 3:10 a.m. Looks like someone walked out of your basement window. Want me to send the clip?" I didn't even text back. I called. She picked up on the second ring. "Hello?" "Yeah, send it right now." "You sure?" Her voice was quiet. "You sound... Send it, please." 2 minutes later, the video came through. It showed the side of my house, grainy but clear. At 3:10 a.m., the basement window slid open from the inside. Then something crawled out. Crawled, not walked. It moved low, like it was trying to stay hidden. Long limbs, disjointed, folding itself in impossible ways. It was tall, way too tall for the window, but it squeezed through like it had no bones. When it stood, it looked human, sort of. Arms too long, neck too short, like its head sat directly on its shoulders. It didn't glance at the camera, just stood still for almost a full minute, then walked across my backyard toward the trees. past my camper, disappeared into the woods. My throat tightened. I felt sick. I called the police. They showed up quickly. 2 officers, polite but skeptical. I showed them the video. They watched it, exchanged a look, then did a sweep of the basement. Found nothing. No prints, no broken lock, nothing missing. But the window was unlocked, and one of my tools, an old crowbar, was lying just under the window, dusted in debris like it had been moved recently. I hadn't touched that thing in years. They said it was probably a